Welcome, everybody. Um, Thank you for coming once again to something I'll hopefully stop at some point. Hopefully, the podcast will be enough. You're all hearing me enough. I don't know if you need to hear me again and again, but at least this gives a chance for people to ask questions, which I prefer, actually. I prefer to sit here for an hour answering questions than giving another presentation, but I'll do my best in any case today. Well, first of all, good news for us here in Tel Aviv. We slept through the night for 2 nights straight. The Houthis did not wake us up. The last time they woke us up was Thursday night going into Friday. This morning around 11 o'clock, the Houthis did fire a missile at Israel, but it was aimed further to the east. So our friends in Jerusalem were forced to go to the shelters, and here in Tel Aviv, we did not. Planes heading to Ben Gurion Airport made a bit of a U-turn, flew around for a little while. The rocket didn't get anywhere close to Ben Gurion Airport, but just for the sake of absolute making sure nothing happens, planes are rerouted in case as soon as a rocket is fired from Yemen. And it's about a 10-minute flight time from Yemen from the time it's first uh, fired until it reaches us. That's more than enough time to move planes, if there are any, out of the way. That has resulted in some airlines returning. Everyone was very happy to see Delta return this past week, give El Al a little bit of competition. It's not much competition compared to the number of flights that El Al has. And El Al, as I reported a couple of days ago, had unbelievably stellar earnings and continues to have stellar earnings. Most of it is because so many other airlines are not flying, and so therefore they have load factors in the upper 90s, which for an airline is an unbelievable thing to have upper 90s load factors and to do that without low cost. But part of the reason is there aren't that many alternatives. But part of the reason, and this is why it may be a long-term trend, is after what we've gone through in the last year and a half, more and more Israelis say, well, at least for going in and out of Israel, I'm only going to fly El Al. I can go to Europe and then take another airline. But in and out of Israel, I'm only going to take El Al because that's the only way to be sure you're going to get in and out of this country because who knows what's going to be in the future. And so I think El Al for the foreseeable future is going to have higher sales and higher load factors, even if when the war ends, people will still tend to go with El Al. There are those people who will be angry at El Al because the prices are much higher or somewhat higher, depending on the routes. And then there'll be some people who say, well, thank God for El Al, because if we didn't have El Al, we'd really be in trouble, which is also true because without El Al, we would be an island without a means of getting out. So for the medium and long term, I think El Al will do well in terms of the result of the war because of that factor that people saying the only thing we can rely on is El Al. El Al is trying to build up its fleet. It received another 787-9, I think it was this past week. It has a whole fleet of new planes on order for delivery in 2 and 3 years. So I guess that's good. I mean, leave everything else aside. But um, obviously, nothing is solved, nothing is better. Um, the question is, how depressing should I be in in this Zoom session? Yeah, I was told that one of my podcasts a couple of days ago was very, very depressing. It reflected, my feelings and the feelings of most people. There's you got to figure out from day to day how depressed you want to let yourself be, to be quite honest with you. I have friends who say, who smile a lot and say, well, just smile a lot and makes you feel better. It's true. I think there's plenty of medical evidence that says if you smile, the dopamine goes into your body and you feel better. So I'll go around and smiling, and I have a friend and she smiles all the time. And maybe it's the way to go, I guess. But most people are not smiling all the time these days. Certainly those people who are um, following what's going on. It's, last night was once again a rally at Hostage Square. It's hard. It's hard to be there. It's hard, they themselves basically say, we come every week, we yell, we scream, we pray, we cry. but no one bothers listening. And that is basically the facts. This government is not listening. This government has made a decision that the hostages are not their priority. And it's felt. And the sense is we can do nothing about it. The only reason why the hostages came back uh, 3 or 4 months ago was because President Trump forced Netanyahu's hand to agree to the deal. And then, of course, Israel walked away from the deal because it doesn't keep deals. I mean, this whole talk, which is so depressing on some levels, no progress is made because Hamas won't um, won't agree to change its demands. Well, they agreed to change their demands at the last deal, and we just walked away because we refused to talk about the day after because um, Netanyahu said the other in his speech that, oh, we'll take some hostage if they give it to us. We'll stop for a little while to take hostages. But as long as Hamas exists, why would they agree to any deal to give up any more of their hostages without an end of the war? I wouldn't if I'm them. So why would we expect they to do it? Uh, it's just not a reasonable expectation for them to give up hostages, and we'd like them to, or I wish they would. They're being held illegally, and all those sort of things. But the reality is, that's the cards they have. They would not give it up unless it's for the end of the war. Now, you can make the argument for the good of the people of Gaza, but when has anything that Hamas has done been for the good of the people of Gaza? So just because it'd be good for the people of Gaza to get a ceasefire, then they're not going to do it. Are they going to agree to give up their rule in Gaza? As long as they can fight, they won't. Now, maybe if we fight for 6 months or 3 months or 9 months or a year, or I'm not sure how long, they won't have anything left to fight with. It's possible. Not likely. Guerrilla wars don't usually end that way. Guerrilla wars keep on going, but maybe the policy might work after X number of months. The only problem with that is a month from now, or 2 months from now, 3 months from now, whatever period of time it is from now, the odds are there will be less than 20 hostages still alive because it's very difficult to sustain oneself inside these tunnels. It's very difficult when Israel is bombing that we don't accidentally place a bomb near one of the tunnels and the result of the bomb doesn't kill some of them. It's not possible to ensure that we don't kill the family members of one of the people who are guarding our hostages, and he doesn't decide, well, you killed my son, my wife, my whoever. I'm just going to shoot a couple of hostages as revenge. There's no reason to expect that some of them won't do that at some point. Every day, the hostages are in danger. If you could make a strong enough argument that would say, okay, with 1 month of war, with 6 weeks of war, with 2 months of war, we might endanger some of the hostages, but we will finally defeat Hamas. If you could, show me a scenario that shows the defeat of Hamas, which we have not done in the West Bank since 1995. We've been fighting them constantly since 1995. But if you could show me a scenario where we defeat Hamas, I wouldn't want to have to make the moral decision, but I'd understand the moral decision vis-a-vis the hostages. But no one can come up with a strategy that says that's going to happen. All they can say is, we'll fight it better. There's a better chance. There's more chances. In the meantime, there's a question of how long the world is going to allow us to keep on doing this. One of former MKs, I'm not sure right now whether he's in the Knesset or not in the Knesset because of the way this Norwegian law works, which is where a minister steps aside and someone else replaces him on a list. So Tzvi Sukkot, who has been in and out of the Knesset over the last few months, stated, "What do we care about the world? We can live on pitot and zata." In other words, we don't need anything. He lives in some settlement somewhere in the West Bank. High tech? What's high tech? International trade? We don't need international trade. We can live on pitot and zata. And way too much of this government and I would say almost all of it, with the exception of two or three members, have absolutely no connection, interconnectivity with the world. Almost none of them actually had real jobs at any point, in terms of if they had real jobs, they were teaching on their settlements or on their places, or they were rabbis or whatever. Almost none of them were involved in the real world, with the exception of Neil Bakat, who was an investor in high tech. Um, and just about like, I'd be hard pressed to think of anyone else um, in this government who has any real interaction with real world economies. Um, they're completely don't understand any of it, quite frankly. Some of them don't care about any of it, and it puts us in a really difficult situation. Now, of course, the events that took place last Thursday after Netanyahu's speech was Wednesday night, and I wrote about Netanyahu's speech. Um, just to say again, it was a frightening speech to listening to him. It was frightening to see how disconnected he was from the rest of the country, or at least a good part of the country. How blameless he's tried to make himself. He had nothing to do with the fact that the Qatari money helped finance Hamas. He made all sorts of ridiculous arguments that the Qatari money only went to feed the hungry. Now, leaving it aside that that isn't true and a lot went directly to Hamas, um, he really doesn't understand the idea that money can go anywheres. Very basic economics. The fungibility of the money can go anywheres. And the fact of the matter is that money allowed them to do what happened. But more than anything else, he made this most ridiculous statement that got everybody angry, so much so that he deleted it from his video, that we were attacked by terrorists in beach shoes, flip-flops, beach shoes, flip-flops and Kalashnikovs. And that was it. And of course, everybody who fought on that day knows that the Nukba terrorists who came that day were heavily armed, armed with RPGs, armed with anti-tank missiles. They had armor, they had machine guns, they were well armed, well trained. They had drone support, and of course, they began their attacks under the under the umbrella of 5,000 rocket attacks on Israel. So that wasn't exactly flip-flops. There was some at the very end that came in flip-flops, but that was just at the very end. Um, so disconnected. And so I'm not responsible. Everybody else in the world is responsible, but I'm not responsible. And the sad part is people actually believe him. There's a substantial portion of our population that believes him when he says these things. And that in and of itself is quite frightening. Now, he was asked as a setup earlier in the day. The Supreme Court ruled against his firing of Ronen Bar and basically said he was in a conflict of interest and couldn't fire him. The Attorney General understood the conflict of interest to also mean that he couldn't hire someone new. And so she immediately issued an order saying that he could not appoint anyone until she developed guidelines of how he could appoint someone without dealing with the conflict of interest. Most likely an outside group, some sort of committee. I don't know. She hasn't released those. But he immediately was asked by the home channel, Channel 14, which is the channel that just supports him, when is he going to appoint somebody? And he stood there. He already had papers he took right out. He was waiting for that question. And basically, he said, I'm going to appoint anyone. I don't care what she said. And the next day, he announced his appointment for the head of the Shin Bet. His appointment is very problematic in multiple ways. First and foremost, the person who was appointed did not discuss it with the chief of staff. Very elementary in the army. If you offered an outside job, you discuss it with the chief of staff. You get permission from the chief of staff to have those discussions. It would have been given, but he didn't do it. It came as almost a complete surprise by the chief of staff. Second of all, he took somebody who is by all accounts, an excellent, excellent fighter, but comes with zero experience in anything that's even close to uh, intelligence. He had no, he was a general for a very short period of time, and the job he has as a general is considered a junior job. He doesn't never had a job in coordination, as sometimes like the head of the Navy does, head of the Air Force, and those sort of people. His job was very limited, and he has no background at all in intelligence and Palestinian affairs and Arabic and any of the things that uh, the person who's in charge of the Shin Bet has to know and should know. He comes from the far right of the political spectrum, as best as we can tell. And of course, the fact that Ben Gvir, the Minister of National Security, far right minister, immediately said he's a wonderful candidate, best possible person, immediately, puts all sorts of red flags. But the biggest problem, of course, is his appointment is on the surface illegal, and the fact that he would accept it makes it very problematic for him to be what's called in Hebrew a shomer saf, which is, I don't think there's a direct translation in English, but it's someone who's responsible for maintaining democracy to some extent. He has a responsibility beyond the direct job responsibility, and his responsibility is beyond to the country. And the Shin Bet, in its law of Shin Bet, says that Shin Bet is responsible for dealing with things that can endanger Israel's democracy. Not only Arab terrorist attacks and things of that nature, but things that can endanger its democracy. And of course, to many of us, what's endangering Israel's democracy is some of the attempts of the far right to pass bills and do things that weaken the democratic structure of the country. So, from all accounts, his appointment is very problematic. A lot of people are questioning why did Netanyahu do it the way he did? In other words, he could have waited. He could have presented him to a committee that would have been established. On the face of it, he has reasonable credentials. I mean, he is a general. He's a successful general by all accounts. It would be hard for the committee uh, to oppose him on ideological grounds. And so there's a very high chance he would be approved if he would have just done it in a normal sort of way and waited a couple of days. But Netanyahu wants this confrontation. Confrontation is good for him politically, and that's what he cares about, is what's good for him politically. It's bad for the country, it's good for him politically. Where it's going to go, we don't really know. It's hard to see how the appointment actually ends up happening. But Zini has burnt himself in terms of his ability to go back to the army at this point, because of the fact that he did all this behind the back of the chief of staff. He was basically told he doesn't have a future in the army. In the meantime, on the ground in Gaza, Israeli troops are moving at a very slow pace. That's partially due to the fact that the goal is to have as minimal casualties as possible. That's partially as a result, theoretically, the American administration is trying to leave an opening for some sort of negotiations. Not sure where that could go. And so it's moving very slowly. Um, there's all talk, give it a few more days, then we'll move faster. It's unclear. Um, the problem is that we also haven't been able to solve the humanitarian crisis that's just gotten worse. We let in a small number of trucks, approximately 80 to 100 a day, which by all accounts is probably minimally 10%. No, I might take that back. Probably one third. 300 is what I think is considered a minimal amount to provide food for Gaza. Uh, so we're letting in a one third of that, which is creating its own chaos. This new American/Israeli company that's supposed to set up to distribute is going to go into operations, they hope, this week. It was supposed to start today, but was delayed. There's an article in the New York Times that tries to explain who they are. The reality is no one's quite sure who this group is. No one's quite sure if they have any expertise in doing it. I question whether it can succeed because of the logistics challenges that are presented at this point with doing this in the way that they're planning to do it. I hope it would succeed, but I don't know. In the meantime, we are hitting from the air. We continue to hit from the air, which in of itself, of course, is problematic because there are secondary targets, shall we say, um, targets we don't mean to hit. Collateral damage is used, and those collateral damages tend to be women and children. And of course, that's all the international media is seeing. Um, and the Israeli media is finally showing it. I have to say there's been a change in the last few days, a realization that it's been kept from the Israeli media for too long, a realization that it's impossible for Israelis to understand why the rest of the world is suddenly against us without seeing to some extent what the rest of the world is seeing. And as a result, the Israeli media is at least showing a little bit of what the rest of the world is showing. They're showing reports on CNN or on BBC or somewhere else to get a sense of what the world is seeing. And of course, it's very problematic. Now, not all of what they're seeing is true. Some of it is fake. Some of it is, AI generated. But by and large, there clearly is suffering in Gaza. There's not a question about that. And clearly, we are killing people who we don't plan on killing. And the problem with all of that is that at the beginning of the war, almost everything was justified. Now, a year and a half later, it makes it more difficult to justify. Also makes it more difficult as we've killed almost every high value target in Gaza. We're down to the next rung on the ladder or the next rung below that. And so how high value can the people we're killing actually be that it's okay to kill innocents together with the high value target if they're not really that high value? And that's the moral dilemma that exists. And of course, last week, Yair Golan, the head of the Democratic Party, got himself deep in butts and mud by making the statement that Israel um, is killing infants as a hobby. Very poor choice of words, as a hobby. If he would have said without due consideration, I think that, I mean, wouldn't it still would have gotten people angry here, but not to the extent using the word hobby. And due consideration is something that I think a lot of people could agree with. Um, he's not known to be a great wordsmith, let's put it that way. And he's not the first ex-general to get into trouble saying the wrong words, certainly early in his political career. On the other hand, a lot of people like him because he actually talks and says things, as opposed to a lot of the other political leaders who are mushy and don't make clear statements. And so that was a clear statement. It's gotten him in trouble. It strengthened Netanyahu to some extent, but we'll have to see what happens in the long run. Uh, Syria for 2 moments. It looks like we're rethinking our approach to Syria at this point. Um, it's not at all clear. For the first time, we haven't said negative things about everything the Syrians are doing. The Syrians have clearly been trying to outreach to us, whether it's a way of staying on the good side of President Trump or whether it's for their own sake. We should be doing everything and risking a great deal to try to bring Syria as a friendly state. The reality is we can do much more for Syria than we can do for Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or other places. We share a border with them. We have ability to help them in ways that almost no one else does. Um, can we work that out? I don't know. It's not at all clear where the Syrian people are. I don't think there isn't the same level of hatred as there are in some places. There are, of course, people who lost their lives fighting us way back when in 1973, but it's a pretty long time ago at this point. Um, so I think there's some opportunities there. Lebanon also has some opportunities. Um, we have been single-handedly enforcing our ceasefire. The Hezbollah has been violating the ceasefire, but every time they do in a way that's obvious to us, we basically go and destroy them in some form or another. The Lebanese government has not been complaining about what we've been doing, which tells me they quietly support it because they're trying to get their upper hand when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon. because they want a Lebanon free of Hezbollah if at all possible. So there's some real possibilities there. But again, it requires a level of dexterity and a government that can operate in ways and planes that this government just hasn't shown its ability to do. That's the sad part. The inability to make use of opportunities, to see, only killing the last Hamasnik as a major opportunity, which of course we can't kill the last Hamasnik, but maybe we could end up with peace with Saudi Arabia, with Lebanon, with Syria. And yes, we still have some sort of problem with Hamas ongoing for many years to come, but it's containable. And the last thing I want to say, um, we have this ongoing problem that every politician brings up. We can't have another October 7th. If we allow the Hamas to reinstitute themselves, there'll be another October 7th. Well, there wasn't an October 7th in the 20 years prior to October 7th, 20 years between our pullout. That's 20, it was 18 years from the time we pulled out of Gaza until October 7th. And October 7th won't happen again. Something else might happen. But October 7th was an event that took place because we were not at the border. We were not fighting. If we would have had a swarm of drones in the air on October 7th would have ended with the destruction of all of the Hamas forces. We didn't. We, a lot of reasons, and I've written them up in a number over the last couple of months in some of the reports. Uh, a lot of reasons we were not in place. But the reality is that October 7th will never happen again. Again, something else might happen, but not on October 7th. Okay, we're at the halfway point. At this point, I hope people have some questions to ask. At least I'll say some more, have something more interesting to say if you request it. So raise your hand, so to speak, and be able to call on you. Yes, Yochi.
I have a kind of off-topic question. I'm in Beersheba and I keep hearing these kind of like muted booms. They're Some of them are strong enough that they shake my building. And I wonder, I'm 20 miles away from Gaza. Do you think I'm hearing the Israeli?
Yes, you're absolutely hearing the Israeli. 20 miles doesn't, it sound carries a long distance and it also carries in the earth a long distance. And we're using big bombs and we're doing it a lot. And so that's what you're hearing on a regular basis. Just imagine what the people sitting in Be'eri or in those places along the border are hearing. And then what are the Gazans and what are the hostages in the tunnels hearing? So that's what you're
Thank
hearing.
you. Great. I'm not great, but
Yeah. Okay. Rebecca.
So, did I understand you to say that the fellow who wrote that Israel is killing babies for a hobby, that he was that gave support to Netanyahu?
Yes, in a way it does, because Netanyahu loves having enemies. And his statement was just a little bit over the top. I mean, or a lot over the top. In other words, if he would have made a comment that said that accidentally Israel is killing too many babies in Gaza, he still would have been attacked by the right. Oh, we're not killing any babies. Now we know that's not the case. We know that unfortunately kids are being killed and babies are probably being killed as well. His problem was by saying it was using the word tahbiv, which translates directly to hobby. Um, it's like someone is doing, the first thing you imagine when you hear that is crazy idiots, shooting at babies' heads as a hobby, like think about a skeet ball or something terrible like that. That's the first thing at least comes to my mind when you say it's a hobby. Now, he didn't mean it that way at all. Um, I think what he meant, even using that word, was to say a hobby is something you don't pay a lot of attention to, right? In other words, we have our work and we have our hobbies. And at work, we're concentrated on what we do. We make decisions based on information, on this, that, all those sort of things. The hobbies that any of us partake in, we're not, some of us take our hobbies very seriously, obviously, but by and large, we don't put as much effort and concentration, etc., at the hobby that we do. So I think what he was trying to say, I'm not his spokesman, obviously, But what he was trying to say was that um, we're doing this, we're killing uh, babies because we're not paying attention, because it's not something important, because it's a side thing. And so we kill babies, it's a hobby, it's not that important.
I
And
see.
by doing that, he was easily attacked as someone who hates Israel, creating, some of the ministers um, used it the day after, the morning after the terrible shooting in Washington, which I didn't discuss at all. Um, the moment the morning afterwards, some of them blamed the shooting on what he said. That because he said that, this person went and shot the Jews or the Israelis in Washington, D.C. So that's why Netanyahu gains support when someone does something far out or not
I see.
accepted beyond on what's acceptable. Claude, I can see your hand from the pictures. So go ahead.
So, thank you. Uh, you probably know little about this, but I've been very concerned about Wednesday night. Where was the security? How do Israeli embassy employees at a large function like this, at the AJC event, at the Jewish Museum in DC, not have serious security?
Okay. I don't
We
know.
have more security at our day schools than what
Right.
I.
Okay. So I don't know a lot. My knowledge of Israeli security is only really 20 years old, or 25 years old when I used to work for the Jewish agency. So I had some connection to all these people. So it's really old, the information, or 30 years old already. But by and large, from what I understand, obviously the Israeli embassy is well protected. Is official Israeli functions are also well protected. This was not an Israeli function. This was an AJC function. The individuals who went, I think, went as individuals. In other words, the event was of young professionals and young diplomats, and they happened to be Israeli, and they happened to also care about um, uh,
Well,
uh,
one was Israeli.
right. Well, one was Israeli, but the other was working in the Israeli embassy. So, a proto-Israeli, let's put it that way, in that sense. And she was about to marry an Israeli. So,
If she
um,
said yes.
I assume she was going to say yes, but okay, let's keep it romantic at least in our memories. But in any case, so it's not a place where Israel provides security. Go to AJC now. That's a question. Where was AJC? Now again, remember something. Think about the shul security. Um, in a gunman would have a hard time sometimes. Well, I don't really think it's such a hard time, but theoretically, our synagogues are protected by a security guard in front of the shuls. I actually think most of the security that the Jewish community has is of limited use against someone who actually wants to is more deterrence than anything else, because anyone who is trained and wants to attack, it'd be hard to defend. But what we don't have, think of any shul or anything else, that this took place afterwards. People were gathered outside as they left. Think of how difficult it would be in an outdoor situation to provide the 360 protection. And don't forget what mostly Washington is considered more or less a secure environment, maybe a lot less these days, but more or less a secure environment. And the hope and expectation is the FBI, which generally does a pretty good job, at least it was until, I don't know, all the new cutbacks. But let's leave that part aside. We don't know yet. Um, Finds these people before and has warnings beforehand. Now, the problem again here is the same problem that Israel has with the lone terrorist. Groups of terrorists are intercepted.
But,
Very
but Mark, people have recounted many times the articles in the journal now and so on and so forth. People saw this person walking back and forth, pacing back and forth, so on and so forth in front of the building. He also got approved. He applied 3 hours before the event to be an attendee. And when the shooting started, the security guards cowered and ran for it.
clear. Again, who are the security guards?
I don't know.
Okay, I guarantee you they weren't Israeli security guards. At least I hope so. But they wouldn't. By and large, I mean, I'm sure they're, rent-a-cops. and rent a couple.
Washington, D.C., the Jewish Museum, an AJC event, Israeli employee embassy employees. If that situation can't be protected, what situ I'm sorry to say this in front of everybody, but securitize where you are because it's a lot of the situations I've been to are, as you're saying, not well
Now,
protected.
protected. Listen, I find this, I didn't discuss this now, but I find this the most frightening thing of everything that's happened recently. Again, because it was a lone guy, he got um, turned on, turned, however you want to describe it, by the propaganda and everything else going on the campus and everything else. And he decided, and there seems to be not an insignificant amount of people on the far left who think that killing is okay. Killing is okay. The far right has its own groups of people, but the far left has this new group of people. And as we all know, getting a gun is pretty easy in the United States. So I think it's incredibly threatening. It's incredibly frightening. It's incredibly frightening. Again, he didn't attack those people, didn't aim at those people because they happened to work for the Israeli embassy. It just so happened that they did. He was targeting a Jewish event that was taking place there, AJC event. Um,
So
and
you think out of all the people, of which most of them weren't Jewish, probably, they were mostly Arab country, Palestinians, Moroccans, Algeria, whatever. He just got lucky, so to speak.
I think so. I don't think he did the intelligence. Maybe we'll find out he did, but I don't think he did the intelligence work to, first of all, know that they were going to be there, find out what they look like, and then decide he's going to. I mean, I think they're probably a telegenic group, two young people who good looking, etc. Yeah, I don't know. We'll find out at some point
Okay.
because they was
Okay.
taken alive. It's a good
And
thing.
you're also saying propaganda. The people that were interviewed in Chicago said that he was horrified by what he was seeing in the news all the time about what's going on in Gaza. I don't know if that's propaganda. You're saying it's AI, but those
No,
pictures
no,
in the
no, no,
Wall
no.
Street
Look, what's going
Journal,
on? No, what's going on in Gaza is terrible. No
that's
question.
not propaganda.
No, no, that's not the part that's propaganda. The part that's propaganda is not is the intellectual jump that says it's okay to take physical violence on third parties in order to stop something that's going on in Gaza. That's the jump. It's not propaganda per se. It's there's the philosophy, the philosophies that have gone on some of the campuses about first of all colonialism and all that, but then the jump that says that I have to take physical action in order to show I care. And that physical action is going to be on a third party that let's just that in some which way might be supporting the actions of the state of Israel, and that's okay to kill innocent people because it's all in the name of stopping the killing. That's where the propaganda, where the shituf, where it's not so much propaganda um, as being converted to an idea that's really very problematic.
Please
Um,
understand, I appreciate everything your family, your children, your wife, and everyone do, and we all do. And I hope you understand that that's what it's coming from my heart.
no,
Thank
I
you for your.
understand very well. Listen, I, I'm very close to the other side of this in this matter. I don't think I'm in too much. Look, Israelis are paying attention at this point. A lot of us are at this point to what's going on in Gaza, but we don't have solutions. That's the problem, not with this government. Yes, Nancy.
Thanks. I joined late, so you may have already talked about this. I apologize. I read this morning that the Trump administration had asked Netanyahu to hold off on the ground operation. Did it also ask them to stop the airstrikes? Do you know what's going on with that?
Okay, I mean, there's been one report that we've heard in Israel that they asked us to hold off the major attack, and we're not even sure what that means, for a few more days to give time for some sort of negotiations. I don't know. Everyone's great hope was that Trump would really come down hard on Netanyahu. Now, there's another factor going on here which we don't know. The big question, I didn't bring this up at all, guess I'll write about it a little bit tonight, is every Israeli every Israeli pundit is asking the big question is where do the negotiations stand with Iran? And that is a really big question. We don't have an answer to it. Uh, It's not at all clear what took place on Saturday. It's not at all clear whether a military strike is on the table with Trump if he'd actually do it. Big question whether he'd actually do it. I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, but that's the big question. If the Iranians don't think he's actually going to do it, then it's going to be very hard to get an agreement that we can all live with. What happens if there's an agreement that we can't live with? All those are very real questions. Does Trump care enough what's going on in Gaza in order to put real pressure on Netanyahu? Well, he's doing it on the side because what's happening, and I've said this before, what's happening with the Europeans is we're not seeing pushback from the United States against what the Europeans are starting to do. The Biden administration would be telling the British, lay back. We'll take care of it. Don't do these sort of things. It's not good. But Europe right now is angry at Trump to begin with. So they're not interested in listening to him. Plus, it does not seem that the Trump administration is actually pushing the Europeans not to push Israel. Now, we're going to be in a really bad situation going forward, both in terms of potential boycotts, um, in terms of also politically, what's so short-sighted by this government is the more we push and make the situation of Palestinians worse, the more the countries of the world are going to want to say, well, look how terrible it was. We need to come back and give them something. Oh, give them something, we'll give them a state. And that I think is a really problematic psychological condition um, that the Israeli government doesn't even thinking about, although people are starting to hear it a little bit. Because I'm against the Palestinian state in the near term. I'm against it, not against it in the future, but in the near term, it's a terrible idea. But the world may force it on us because we're being so, terrible on some levels. Look, we didn't start the war. They started the war. They're still holding our hostages. They could end the war in a moment, uh, but they won't. It still doesn't make it any easier for what we're doing, and it's not easy. It's all bad in that level. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah, is Rebecca again? Was that an old?
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, no, it's not old. Huh. So I read something in the last 2 days saying that Israel was within 3 days of bombing nuclear sites in Iran.
Okay, I don't believe that. I mean, they've always been within 3 days of bombing nuclear sites in Iran. Israel is not, I mean, I won't say never, and I don't, a close friend of mine said to me, when will we know that Netanyahu is at the end of his ropes in terms of his legal and political situation if he bombs Iran? Um, so there is that fear, it exists. However, we are not going to bomb Iran, in my opinion, without the United States, without the approval of the United States, without the United States' support, without the United States' defense, and frankly, without the United States participating, because I don't think we can be as effective. I think we can only be a limited effect. I frankly am not in favor of bombing Iran's nuclear facilities. I'm in favor of bombing their ports and their oil and everything we possibly can do to undermine the regime. Because bombing the nuclear facilities will only delay them a certain amount of time. We're not sure how long. We need regime change in Iran. The United States needs regime change in Iran. The Middle East needs regime change in Iran, and it's a very unpopular regime. That's what we need to do. We need to figure out, be smarter, and not bomb sites that we can have a negative impact on ourselves if we do so. So, um, I don't know, but I don't think we're not gonna do it without the Trump administration. I don't think even Bibi would do that. Um, there was an argument I heard on the air a little bit earlier. If it was a Democratic administration, he might do it, but against Trump, he won't do it. I think there's a lot of truth in that. So we'll have to see. But I don't expect it. But then who expected anything this past year? So I don't have any simple solutions. Okay. Anyone else? Well, thank you all. I hope you're finding the podcast interesting. I hope, interesting guests on every Wednesday, which I actually release on Thursday morning. This week we have someone with a strong military background, a good friend, and have a list of additional people in the coming weeks. And well, thank you for coming. And maybe one of these weeks we'll stop, but right now we'll plan to do this again in 2 weeks. So thank you all. Have a great 2 weeks. Oh, probably one day this week, and we may not come out. My wife and I are taking a vacation this week for a few days. We'll see how we work in the daily update into this week. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Mark.
Thanks.
So-
Mark.